Yeah, it's kind of like you're when you are playing a video game and you reach and you beat that boss that you've been battling with back and forth for so long, and so like you reach that next rank, that next level, and you're just like, I've mastered this game. I have mastered it. I have become essentially the best that there is at this game, and so I can do anything. And so then you go into that next level, and you're like, if I could beat that thing, like what? There's nothing that can stop. And you go on the next level, and you're just like, you hit that wall, and you're like, holy crap! I thought I had this thing figured out. I thought this was going to get easier. And all right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads, where being mediocre is a choice and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. I'm your host, Quan. I go by Q. I'm going to be honest, guys. It feels like we haven't done this in a hot minute. It really does. It really, really does. It feels like I haven't done a Mediocre Dads podcast in forever. And if I really have to think back about it, I think the last time I actually did one was a recorded one was in the beginning of December. So it's super exciting to be back actually doing the main podcast. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, except TikTok, of course, because who knows, it's probably going to get banned in the United States here in the next few days. And if you are a returning viewer, welcome. Please share this with your friends. Let's get more viewers here. Let's get more people to really get into the conversation about fatherhood. Without further ado, guys, I have a very special guest with me. We were kind of talking beforehand, and he was listening to my TED Talk of what was going on at work, which I'm really appreciative of. He's just, I can already tell he's just a real calm, cool, collected dude. And I think it's going to be a great conversation that we have, because I think he's when he reached out, or I think it was I reached out, or whatever the case was, very intriguing, right? The tattoo aspect of it all to me was very intriguing. But I don't want to take his spotlight. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. So without further ado, guys, I have you, Mark. Is it Nara? Did I say it right? Mark Nara?
Yeah, that's it. Mark Nara.
Yeah. Perfect. Go ahead, Mark. Can you kind of introduce yourself to the audience? Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, first, thanks for having me on, mate.
Absolutely.
Like you said, we're having a chat, and your time's precious at the moment. It's getting squeezed, so I'm glad you're making time to have a chat, and I know you're doing that for your listeners as well. So if anyone that's listening, appreciate your time as well. Hopefully our chat brings something that's valuable to the surface. But yeah, like you said, tattooing's kind of my focus. Obviously I'm a father as well. I don't just define myself as my job title like I used to before becoming a dad. So there was that stage where tattooing consumed my identity. I wanted to be the best tattooist in the world. That was the purpose. And then, the little kids come along and shift everything, flip it on its head. So I've got 3 kids. My eldest is 7. My youngest is just shy of a year. And I'm loving it. Absolutely loving being a dad. It's the most testing thing that, I've ever done. Most challenging thing. I
like that. Testing. There we go. Because that's really what it is. It's the testing aspect of it.
It's a big challenge, hey. Yeah. It really framed up the experience that we have here as more of a classroom experience than a playground. I had one old fella explain that to me, that this experience is more of a classroom than a playground, but I didn't fully get it till I was like a parent. I was like, okay, the test is like ever present now,
Yeah. Did you, were you, I don't mean to interrupt you, but were you one of the, because I did it myself. So I try to ask this of all the fathers, but kind of one of those dads before you came dad, you're like, hey, my kids won't do this, my kids will do that. This is kind of like, we have some rules in your head of like how you expect your kids to be and act and whatnot. And you don't take in consideration, one, they're probably going to have your personality. And if you know anything about yourself, you're right. So speaking for myself, very rebellious as a kid. So like, it was like, nah, my kids are going to be good order and discipline. They're going to listen to me and whatnot. And then, of course, you have your wife in the mix, and our wives are great. You know, if they're watching and listening when this is coming out, you are great, and we love you, regardless of how unstable you might be at times. We love you. Yes.
Yeah.
Aubrey, I love you. Please don't hurt me. No, I'm joking. But you don't take in consideration the personalities that you guys are bringing together, and then you're like, okay, oh yeah, these kids, these individuals, they're gonna have their own individuals, their own people. They're gonna have their own personalities, and some of them like to be defiant and very no. My second, she tells me no all the time. And it's like one of the most infuriating things, because I'm like, yo, you're just barely over 1 year old. What are you telling me no for? Like,
Yeah.
I feed you. Like, I can stop doing that. Like, you know, like I control. Like, why are you being so mean to me? You know, I don't know. It's funny. I don't know. Did you have that thought, or was that something that you had thought about? Like, oh, my kids, I want my kids to do this, I want them to do that.
100%. I think, like you have a certain vision of how things are going to go. You have this picture painted, and it totally warps on you. You know, it's like it's nothing like what you anticipate, right? I think part of it for me was like thinking I was going to do so many things different to my own parents. You know, there's this like reflecting on childhood and being like, you know, they didn't know this or they didn't know that, and I know so much more. And then, like you said, the kids are these little these fractal holograms of you and your wife. And then you're going like, oh, this is what it was like for my parents. I understand why they did what they did now. Okay, and I'm not so begrudging towards them, right? So we're experiencing that right now. Yeah, there's like different things happening with my eldest that I'm just starting to really catch, like how she's experiencing the world, and that there's probably a mismatch in sort of like what I was thinking her experience was, you know. I'm like, oh, that's what was happening for me too. And at this stage, you know, my parents, speak quite openly about it. It's like, you know, these are like sort of learning difficulties and this sort of like neurodivergent aspect, you know. And when I went through that as a kid, you know, I was given these sort of like different avenues to do things differently and to learn. It's like, it was helpful. And on the back of it, I was like, oh, you know, I don't know why they did that to me. Maybe it could have been like this. But now I'm there with my own child going like, I can see why. I can see why now.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that before. You know, I didn't have that access before. I think everything changed within like 6 months, Q. I can remember 6 months into becoming a dad and just having this like huge grieving process where it's just like, oh my gosh, everything that I was picturing and thought before this moment actually has ceased to exist. And I got to catch up with the new role and the new experience that is probably going to be for the rest of my life, you know, or until the next big transition happens, you know. And I didn't realize that the other one was actually going to cease to exist. It was done. Like, you know, that's not your life anymore, you know. So
Well, so you've been a parent for a while now, right? Because your oldest is 7, and my oldest is about to turn 7 in May, and so you know, do you remember the life you had before you had kids? And I ask that because I can remember bits and pieces, but I can't remember the things that I thought or I told myself. I'm like, I'm gonna remember this for the rest of my life. I don't know. Those are filled with memories of my kids, right? And just like my phone, I can go way back and take pictures of just me and my wife, right? But now majority of my pictures on my phone are my kids, and you're just like, you're going back and you're just like, this is all I have in the memory bank. This is it. Like that life before is like, what was life before, you know, kids? Like it didn't seem like there was. Well, at least for me, it didn't seem like I really had a purpose outside of just hanging out, you know. And then these little beings show up in your hands, and they're so small, and you're like, I'm responsible for this thing, this person. And it's like, it's scary and intimidating. And then, they get out of, after a few months, they're growing and growing. And, you start to see the flips of their personality, whether it's smiling or whatnot. You're like, oh my gosh, what was my life before this little human being? Like, forget that. Like, this is love. This is what life is all about. And so I don't know if you remember it really, like what you had going on before, but
yeah, I mean, look, I can remember that the things that were at the forefront, sort of consuming my drive and my purpose, were extremely superficial, and you don't get that context until, like you're saying, you have another personality turning up that you're responsible for, and it's kind of like, it's a big game changer, and it just activates something in you it's like your capacity to experience things gets blown out in all directions, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's like you're functioning in this small, limited field. Like, this is me, this is what's important to me. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I've just gone beyond me, and I can see me and my wife and my parents and my grandparents and all of my in-laws and everyone in this little being that's just like pure and growing. And then your capacity to experience like purpose and joy and direction increases, and your capacity to sort of like experience, like we're saying, challenge or regret or fears or pain, all of that increases exponentially as well. So there's just like your whole circumference expands at this point, and I think, for me, if I think back prior to kids, there's like two stages there. You're a kid. And I think when you're a kid, you probably think, that's all there is. It's like, I'll be a kid and then I'll become an adult. And so when you leave the childhood thing, you're like, oh, I've made it. I'm an adult now. I'm not a kid anymore. But when you take that step into the parenthood thing, then you can look back and go like, oh, wow, okay. That was just kind of the tip of that first stage, really. And you think that's going to last forever. And then if you take the invitation and you're sort of blessed enough, lucky enough to find a partner and end up as a parent, it really, really starts to kick off, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's kind of like when you are playing a video game and you reach and you beat that boss that you've been battling with back and forth for so long, and so like you reach that next rank, that next level, and you're just like, I've mastered this game. I have mastered it. I have become essentially the best that there is at this game, and so I can do anything. And so then you go into that next level, and you're like, if I could beat that thing, like what? There's nothing that can stop. And you go on the next level, and you're just like, you hit that wall, and you're like, holy crap! I thought I had this thing figured out. I thought this was going to get easier, and and that's when you introduce the kids, and when you're just like, oh, I thought I had arrived. I thought, like, I am ready to take on this next chapter of life, and I got it, and then you realize very quickly, like, maybe I didn't have it all figured out. I actually have some more questions, and I actually want to say sorry to my parents, because you start to realize more and more how much of a pain in the butt you were, and realize how patient they were with you, and you were like, and it's like, I'm envious, of their level of patience, because I was like, my parents are impatient. It was like you said earlier. I thought my parents didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't have a full grasp of what, or understand, or they couldn't grasp what my life was like, because when they grew up, it was different. And don't get me wrong, there were a lot of differences, but ultimately it wasn't. So it wasn't that different, right? And so I just thought I knew more than them. And like you said, I thought I kind of had this idea where they were just living in the past. And then sure enough, after several conversations in, growing up, you start to realize, you start to reflect on certain conversations you had with them where you're like, that is what they meant when they said this.
Yep.
This makes sense
Yep.
now. This is all
Yep.
coming back full circle. Did you, I'm not say you were a bad kid or anything, but I'm sure you at one point you might have gotten to trouble here and there. But did you, after you had your kids or you, after some years of raising your kids, did you ever have a conversation with your parents where you call them and just be like, hey, you were right, I'm sorry?
Yeah, totally. I had one with my mum yesterday.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's totally awesome.
Yeah, because it keeps going, It's not like there's just one epiphany. It's like there's all these incremental shifts in your way of understanding and what you're viewing. It'll keep happening with us, right? It's like, wait till our kids are teenagers, we'll be in it again, just going like, yeah, right.
Especially the daughters, man. I got 2 daughters. Imagining them as teenagers, oh my gosh, stresses me out. I'm probably going to be bald.
Yep. See, lots of things start to make sense. It's like, I think there's that thing, right, where it's like as a kid, your context is so limited. So you go like, oh, parents are dinosaurs. They're thinking, you've got this old way of viewing things. But it's like as you get older and you start to zoom out, all of the lines kind of start to blur a bit, and you go like, no, there is something as simple as the circle. There's this thing that's as simple as the roles shifting in these kind of like more objective or like underlying patterns that just repeat themselves all the time, that inform those things that they say to us as kids that we don't understand, and then they make sense later. They're all there, right? And so it's a beautiful thing, actually, and it sort of, it frames up this idea of the natural initiations that are there for people that are participating in life, I guess, as it's presented, as it's intended, right? If it's like you grow up and you move into a space where you also start to recreate life, and you're part of that system that's always been there, that's got us here. You see that there's these inbuilt stages, like becoming a teenager, for example, or becoming a parent. Parent's like this huge one, quite a big pivot, where you're introduced into a whole tier of experience that was completely unknown to you. It's like you have a parent, but it's like you do not have the capacity to put yourself in their shoes. You just can't do it. And I think keeping that in your mindset as a parent is really important, where it's like the things that we're receiving on the end of going into parenthood that are like quite, enlightening, things that start to like remove some of the fog, or like when the penny starts to drop, it's like the kids can't comprehend that. It's not until, hopefully, God willing, they get to move into that stage themselves, right? And so I think like the one thing that I do look at from my own childhood, and I try and sort of bring in as a point of difference now, is just trying to be more patient where I can. Just like trying to hold on to the other side before becoming a parent a little bit, and just be like, they were there and I can see how much I didn't know then, and so they also don't know, and it's okay. I can't expect them to really digest everything I'm saying from where I am, so like how can I present it in a way that like might be meaningful to them now and offer that thing later, opposed to like, you'll see when you get here. That real old school thing is like, when you're here, you'll understand. Trying to be like, you'll understand it like this when you're here, maybe, if you're lucky enough. But for now, maybe understanding it like this might be like a bite size that's useful, I try to. I don't know how good I'm doing. I'm just like making it up as I go, right?
Well,
pretending I know what I'm doing.
It's funny because you start to realize, right, like maybe our parents were making it up more than we picked up on, of like, oh, you came up with that, and then you're like, you know what? I'm not the originator of this idea. However, I am going to take credit for the idea, and I'm going to use it as my own, and be like, look, Dad's got you. and you're able to like, stretch yourself a little bit and be like, man, that's so wise. And you're just like, oh, that was my parents. Thank God I had them.
Yeah.
But, I really like what you said. I really want to key in on what you said there. It was that our kids, we have these experiences in life and these things that we go through that we experience and this understanding that we've garnished over the years of being on this earth that we sometimes as parents can project on our kids and to expect them to be able to understand and perceive things how we understand and perceive these things to be happening. So for an example is when we tell them something and they don't listen and or it's like, hey, go clean your room, and they don't clean their room, but it's like the fifth or sixth time you're telling them this, they don't understand the correlation of like, hey, I should only have to tell you once. And the reason is because when you go to work, when you go to job, when you're in a professional environment, your boss is only going to tell you once if you're lucky. If he or she has to tell you again, that could mean you're going to be fired. And so like, there's that correlation and understanding that we have as adults and say like, oh, this is how the real world works. However, our kids are just like, one, it could be funny to them, or two, it could be like, I want a little more attention, so I'm going to be defiant, right? Like, I don't think all of it is completely malicious, but again, it boils down to that experience and that, and us being like, understanding like our kids do not see the world as we do because they haven't lived as long as we do. They live in a blissful ignorance that I want to maintain for as long as possible. Because truthfully, the world is an evil. There's a lot of evil out in this world. There's a lot of wickedness, and it's scary. And so while you want to prepare them, you also want to allow them to still be kids. You want to allow them to enjoy their childhood and to be able to, as things start coming in, as their eyes start to really open to the world around them, they can at least reflect on like, oh man, but I did have a good childhood, and my parents were loving, my parents were kind, they taught me what I needed to, and I can lean on those moments when things get hard versus introducing to our kids as early as possible how vile the world is and just having a gloomy outlook on life and never being able to leave that space of just negativity.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah. It's like the world can really demand for a lot of children that they need to grow up quickly. So I think like listening to our chat, it's like we were probably in situations where, we had a pretty lucky upbringing, provided for and that. And so, yeah, being in a position that we can do that with our kids and sort of insulate them from the world for a good amount of time. That's prepare them and insulate them. I think it's the right thing to do, man. Because like you said, the reality of the world is harsh. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I wanted to dive into, I know everyone can see, all right, he's got this tattoo on his neck. Now, I don't know if, and first and foremost, so I'll ask you this: is it a thing in Australia for if the person has a lot of tattoos? Is it perceived to be a negative thing? Or is that kind of like a pastime thing where it's like, oh, you got a bunch of tattoos, or you got a tattoo, especially you got a tattoo on your neck, right? And I say it that way because it's clear and it's obvious, not as being a bad thing, but is there a negative perception around tattoos in Australia? And if you have a bunch of them, like, oh, you're not looked upon as a productive member of society.
Stereotypes definitely exist here, but I think it's more generational these days. I mean, like you go around to different countries and there is like sort of this geographic layer of how people perceive tattooing, for sure. But I think more globally now, probably because of the internet, right? This whole screen, these portals into different places, how porous the world is, and that influence. It's like, it's more generational than anything. So the stereotype usually sits in like in the older generation. But here in Australia, it's pretty commonplace. Lots of people get tattooed. People don't think too much of it. I can remember back being a kid, it's like you'd see someone that was heavily tattooed and that would be their arms were covered or something, maybe something on your neck, and you'd be like, wow, that person has a lot of tattoos. Or, I'd think twice. But I'd inherited and was running the previous generation's stereotype, which I've done a lot of work on now, unpacking. Whereas these days, I think, unless someone's gone to town on their face and there seems to be some type of like maybe sporadic or instability that shows up in what's happening with their tattoos, people don't think too much about it. There isn't too big a deal. And that's like, on one hand, people might say like, oh, well, there's this sort of like progress being made, that people aren't being stereotyped as like bad or a criminal or something when they're not. But at the same time, it's like, and I talk about this a lot, the value of a tattoo has also been lost as well, where it's like, when you see it there, it should emote something in the person that's viewing you, and initially the intention with tattooing in most cultures was that it would elevate someone. You'd see it and it would you'd know that person had sort of accomplished certain things or was a certain member in society. It's a more recent thing for it to be this stereotype of like, oh, maybe that's a bad person, not a fit and proper person. In society. That's more recent, but that's phasing out too. To answer your question, like that's phasing out, especially here in Australia. My experience in the States and in Europe and stuff is that it's phased out as well. The only place I really experienced any sort of like pushback against the tattoos was Japan, actually.
Oh yeah, they're very serious on the markings their bodies. And it's mostly, I think it's mostly gangs that are considered, or people who are part of organizations are the only ones who have tattoos. And so I think it's been one of those long-standing generational things where they're just very like, don't get a tattoo. Yeah. But I think obviously, like you said, with the internet, there's people out there who are Japanese who are like, well, I get a tattoo because I am curious in the sense of like, what is this thing I can create on my body this piece of art that can really show you a piece of who I am, right? And but like you said, I think a lot of people are getting tattoos just for the sake of getting tattoos, in the sense of like there's no actual meaning behind them. There's no underlying meaning. It's just like, I thought it would be cool to get a freaking, I don't know, Mario on my arm. And it's like, okay, I mean, sure, go for it, I guess. But like, I am of the belief that, if you're going to permanently put something on your body, it should have value and it should have meaning behind it versus just for the sake of doing it. That's just me, right? Like I'm only one person. I can't tell people how to live their life. But okay, so what led you into tattooing then, right? Because, I imagine, and when you're growing up, going your middle school, high school, potentially you would go to college. I think you guys refer to as university, if it's correct.
Yeah.
So what did you go to university? Did you do all those things, try to do what was considered normal, or did you always know like, hey, I want to be a tattoo artist, or I want to be an artist that produces art on people's bodies and just really show my talent?
Yeah, look, I did go to university or college, as you put it, and that paralleled me doing my tattoo apprenticeship, and it sort of all had to do with art then. Like I said at the start, it was like very art oriented. Whereas now I've moved away from that art space, right? So there's like a bit of a gap now between the way I work with people and the thing that sort of I'm bringing to the table as an offering for people, and what it was that I got into tattooing for. So there was like this stage of going to university, doing visual arts, doing an apprenticeship, learning how to tattoo technically, and that being the sort of drive and the pursuit, which I did pretty good at. I got into this place where I was doing technically good tattoos and people wanted to get tattooed and the rest of it. But it's still quite superficial. So like you said, they need to be meaningful. But there's like there's different depths to that as well, right? You know, so something that's superficial, someone might say that it has meaning still. You know, it's like, I got Mario because I really like Mario, you know, or I enjoy playing that. It's part of my life. It's part of who I am. Yeah, but we're still just like playing around on the surface. When you start to get deeper, it's looking at the actual function of a tattoo beyond what the visual is. So beyond the art. And I was thinking about this morning while I was mowing the lawn, you know, and it's like, it can get real dry out where I am. There can be like no grass. It's been raining recently. And so there's like everything's shooting up and grass and weeds and all sorts of different things. And I was thinking about this layer of sowing and harvesting. And like when you're really focused and intentional about what it is that you're putting in, and I'm using this analogy for tattooing, right? So let's say old mate's like, he's sowing the Mario seed into his arm in his early 20s. That's what he's putting down as the seed of who he is at that point in time, of what's relevant, what he cares about. And then you give it time, you know, seasons and cycles, and he is actually going to grow as a person. And it's like, is what that tattoo's giving him, you know, is he able to extract something from that, some value, harvest something? You know, and this is one of the functions of a tattoo. It's meant to do that. So you get your tattoo, and as you move away from that point in time, as you grow, it's like, does that thing that you implanted back then provide you a reflection or a piece of information or a view on yourself? Kind of like we're talking about these seasons of going from a child to a parent, you know, through that window of tattoo, through that thing you sewed, can you harvest something that's valuable, right? And it's an innate function. I feel like our current society or our current tattoo culture doesn't understand how to do that well. They're not very good farmers. You know, it's like they're not really aware of this process of what's happening. They're not aware of like the needing to tend to this aspect, you know, removing things you don't want there, looking at how something's growing, revisiting the work you've done in the past. These are all layers of the tattoo process that really get overlooked, right? So most people have, using the garden analogy, they have like this mismanaged, kind of overgrown, unchecked, disregarded situation in terms of what's happening with them and their tattoos. So now I've gone a long way from the initial question around the art side of it and how I got into it. But that stuff's pretty standard, you know, and I think it's more like where it's at now, it's actually going to be valuable to people that are listening in too, you know, because lots of people have tattoos. I'm sure lots of people that are listening and are in your audience probably have tattoos, right? And we forget they're there. This is the unattended garden. It's like we get a tattoo and they're there. And unless someone asks us or we catch a glimpse of it or something, most of the time we even forget that they're there. But their function is to allow us to remember something. So it shows like how much we've dropped the ball on what the point of getting a tattoo is, which is allow us to remember and to reflect, right?
Well, I got, for one, I think you're right. In a lot of ways that this tattooing or tattoos as a whole, it's evolved, and we have tended to forget why we got them in the first place, like the value we put on them, especially like, you know, if you remember the first time you got your first tattoo, right? And you got to put the ointment on it, and you got to keep it, and you want to keep it wrapped for maybe, I don't know, for a few hours, I think it is. I haven't got tattooed in a little bit, but, and then you would got the Vaseline style stuff that you're constantly reapplying to make sure it stays, it doesn't get dry and all this, right? That care process for it. But like after several weeks of that, you no longer have to apply the ointment on there to keep it there, whatever, right? You just kind of like, it just comes a part of you and just kind of naturally fades away and you forget about it. And and I say that because that's my experience. Like, I was excited when I got my first tattoo. I got my first tattoo at this dude's house. Now he was a tattoo artist. From my understanding, he had his actual certification in the States to be to give tattoos, but he just wasn't working at a shop just yet. And so I think it paid him like $150 or something for my first tattoo, and it was a cross and it had a ribbon going through the cross, and behind it was kind of like a shine, like this supposed to be like the sun, and written on that ribbon was El Shaddai, which means God Almighty. And I remember when I was going to get the tattoo, because I was 18 and I was still living with my parents, and they used to tell us all the time, like, hey, if you want a tattoo, you can't live under my roof. But before I got a tattoo, right? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? But like before I got the tattoo though, it's me, my twin brother, and my parents in the living room discussing like what I'm going to go get tattooed. And my mom is actually helping me to decide like what I want to get. And because I told her, I was like, hey, I want to get a cross, but I was like, I don't want to be something so simple. I want to get some writing in it. And I was showing her some pictures. And she goes, well, why don't you get something that, when people see it, they got to ask you what it means. And I was like, okay, like, and I literally go, what do you mean? And she goes, well, like, she said Elohim, or El Shaddai, or just things referring to God, right? Like these are the names that were used to refer to God in the Old Testament. And, for me, El Shaddai really just stuck out. So I was like, you know what? El Shaddai it is. So that's what I got. That's what I got. Yeah. And I remember being in this dude's house. It was my brother, my girlfriend, who is my wife now, stopped by, kind of saw, like, was kind of stay there for like 30 minutes, and then she left. And then it was crazy. It was a crazy time. Like I said, like my parents didn't, like I'm growing up, like I remember 15, it was like, no, you can't get a tattoo. No, you can't get a tattoo. And then 3 years later, here is my mom and my dad helping me decide the first tattoo that I'm going to get. But I'll tell you this, I think by them helping me decide, it actually took the excitement out of wanting to get a tattoo, out of just like trying to be like, go against your parent. Rebellious. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Like, like being rebellious, and it took the kind of pizzazz, the spark of like, oh, I'm going to go be rebellious. They're never going to know, right? Like it took it out of that. And then so it turned into like, well, I want a tattoo because I want to have meaning, and I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. And so that was my very first tattoo. And ever since then, like I've gotten three tattoos after that, all on my forearms, and I will tell you, like after that, like I'm like, I told my wife was like, hey, are you going to get more tattoos? And I was like, so honestly, I'm good. Like not in the bad way. I just like, I don't, if there's something that I want to get tattooed, maybe, but as of right now, I'm like, I've got everything I wanted. Like all I really wanted was, I don't know how much I can see here, but like I wanted roses on my arm. Like that's what I wanted. I don't know if it's ever going to focus. Is it going to focus? I don't think it is. Anyway, I wanted roses. And so I got these roses, and like, it gets covered. It's my right forearm, but then on the right arm is John 14:6, and on the forearms like right here, and then on the other one so it goes. It says Jesus saves, and then under Jesus says John 14:6. And then under saves, it's Elijah 26:3. And like those two verses mean the world to me and in the Bible.
What's John 14 and what's Elijah? Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to hear the passages.
No, you're good. So John, Elijah 26:3, because I actually do have it memorized, but it's keep those in perfect peace who trust in you. And then John 14:6 refers to Jesus being the way. Hold on, let me pull it up here. Yeah, and as Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." It's crazy. It's crazy because we're talking about meaning, right? And so, like, when I first heard that verse, when I was sitting in church.
Yeah.
I wrote it down, and I took note. I was taking notes. I wrote it down in the notes, and I always kind of remember going back to that verse, just like, okay, this is who Jesus is. Jesus just depicted and explained to us who he is and how we can get to the Father. And so, like, it just lives in my frame, my head rent free for the longest time. And so, truthfully, when I wanted something and I was deciding, I was like, okay, Jesus saves because, he saved us by dying on the cross for our sins. But then I wanted a verse to also help depict that for me and always remind me of that, and it was that John 14:6. I apologize. It's my wife trying to FaceTime me. I thought I might turn my phone off. It was that, Jesus saves for John 14:6, but then Elijah 26:3 was the verse that my wife would send me, or she sent me when she would write letters to me when I was in basic training. And the verse that she sent me, that stays with me forever, is Elijah 26:3. Keep those in perfect peace who trust in you. So, and those are the meanings behind my tattoos. And I love my tattoos, right?
Beautiful.
But like you said, it's so easy for us to forget. And so us talking about it though, it puts me back in the moment when I was about to get them and why I was getting them. So
yeah, it's nice hearing you retell it because I can see how alive the memory is, and that's one of the things that I'm really getting people to look at when I work with them. It's like you're in this position where your tattoos, and when you're reflecting and sort of like, I guess, getting that return on investment, everything in there feels good and is aligned. You haven't moved away from that version of yourself to a degree where there's any sort of like contradictions,
Yeah.
Whereas that's really common these days. These days, there's a lot of people that have things like, maybe the person we're talking about that gets Mario, they end up carrying something with them that's like of an opposite weight and influence on them and their character than like those ones are having for yourself, So it's nice hearing yours and going like everything sort of sits right and makes sense and you're in a good place with it. Whereas, and also that you're at a place where it's like, you're like, no, I can pull the handbrake on it. I'm good at the moment. And if I need more at some stage, I'll know what that is and I'll go into it. That's great. It's more common to hear stories of people ending up in spaces where their tattoos, they're confused about it. So they might pull a handbrake because they're like, I've got stuff that doesn't work, it doesn't fit. And so they're like hesitant to do anything about that, even though it lives in them. It's there all the time, right? So it's having some layer of influence, and I'm getting a clearer picture of like just how much when we start looking at like the psychotherapeutic layers, psychological layers and emotional layers and stuff. But then also people can get in this space where they just keep getting tattooed and almost like spinning their wheels because they don't actually know the right way to go about it. And so they end up getting like pretty blown out in terms of what's happening to them. They take a lot of damage in this pursuit of trying to represent themselves, or maybe even like people talk about this like addiction thing where you can get addicted to tattoos, and like there's some sensation that's being satisfied through the process that again isn't probably accurate of who they are, but they just keep leaning into that, and so unfortunately, like that's how the industry is what it is as a result of more as a result of all of this sort of misaligned layer of tattooing. It's blown out to a proportion that's kind of like unsustainable to a degree. So people they're not getting that guidance. Listening to your guidance from your folks at home, that's so beautiful, man. It's a nice one when the parents sort of on sides their child to sort of, offer some guidance and stuff. I'm guessing your parents probably didn't have tattoos. I could be wrong, but if they had that first narrative
They
of,
did not.
can't
Yeah.
get one.
No, they did not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were, and my parents are older, so I was adopted. And so my parents are fairly older. So my mom, she was born in the 50s. My dad in the late 60s. Late 60s. And man, I don't know what the year my dad was born. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've never really actually considered, but I
Yeah.
but I know how old he is. But yeah. But yeah, they're older, so like at that time, then when they were growing up, when they were adults, in that generation, it was more of the hippie generation that had the tattoos, because it was just the free living lifestyle, whatever. And so
Of course.
you didn't want to be associated with someone that was not considered a productive member of society.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dogs want to come in here, but they were just very much. It was just very much that kind of was where they were at, and so that was what it was. But then I think for them, they knew, hey, I'm gonna get a tattoo. Like, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of, do you want to be a part of the process or not, right? And I think for them, it was more of like, at least if we can influence what he gets versus him just going out willy-nilly getting something that he's going to have on his body for the rest of his life, and just not be able to reflect on like why he got it, then there would probably be more, not necessarily more regret for me, but then regret in the sense for them of just like how we could have helped influence that decision. Right. And I think that's what it was for them. And that's what truly they did. They did influence that decision, because I did value what they had to say in their input on what they would thought I should get if I were to get anything. So when you give tattoos, right, is there this feeling that you have or you can relate to, where you're just like, hey, like when the person is describing to you like what they want, is there emotion behind it where you're like, I can see their vision, and I'm here to make that vision possible, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I know some tattoos are easier than others, but is that, can you kind of, is it more of a empathetic thing where you can feel kind of some of the emotion behind them telling you like this is what they're getting, and as you're tattooing on, like, okay, this person described this to me, and I understand why they're getting it, and you, as you're doing it, and you're like, I want to make it meaningful for them. Is that what it is for you, or is it something
for sure
else?
That's definitely part of it. It's like I don't want to move into a process of tattooing anyone unless I can really comprehend where they're coming from and what it's about for them.
Yeah.
Like looping back to when you were considering yours, and you said your parents coming alongside you and being supportive kind of disarmed the rebellious aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the work I'm doing, we're sort of looking at all these sort of archetypal patterns that motivate people and what sort of path they're on with their tattoos and stuff. And the rebellious archetype, the rebel, is super common, especially for first tattoos at that age bracket that you're talking about, right? Like 16 to 25. And there's lots of other archetypes too. So a big part for me is just trying to fully get on their page, feel and comprehend where they're acting from, so that equally it's like I can either offer guidance that may disarm something that will allow the tattoo to potentially take them a degree off course. If we were to have a, you can move in a path of bettering yourself or not, what are we adding fuel to? And so for me, understanding that, again, using this seed sowing analogy, it's want to make sure that we're putting down something that they're going to be able to reap benefit from. We're not just scattering weeds or something in there, or worst case scenario, putting something that's actually poisonous to them in there, because that can happen as well. So yeah, there is this wanting to be able to empathize with them, but then there's also bringing in that whatever I can, sort of my knowledge set, to offer up something in their process that's going to be useful, Oh, the dogs are in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
They
you're
were
right.
at the door, and I was like, this is going to frustrate me. So
Yeah, let them in.
I
Let
don't know
them
if you
in.
can hear them. So like because I can hear them, I'm like, oh my gosh.
No, I
I'm
can't
I'm
hear them.
alone at my house, so my wife and daughters are on vacation right now, so it's just me and them. So like they're very attached to me, so it's all good. But I apologize.
No, that's fine.
But
That's fine. Yeah, I think that layer that you touched on though that's important is like how parents communicate to their children what a tattoo is. That's one thing I think about a lot. Again, thinking of the sort of what's the sustainable approach to tattooing, because the industry is not doing a good job of it. It's kind of like tattooing's become quite a messy situation at the moment. I don't think a lot of people in maybe in our generation, but the one under us, are going to be too psyched about their tattoos. I don't think they're going to be too happy with them down the line because of how easily accessible it is, and just how many are leaning into that rebel layer, and this seeming like disregard for oneself, and adopting this like life's meaningless narrative. Like if we were to use your tattoos, for example, and some of mine, it's like there's this real tangible connection to something that's beyond yourself and makes your life and what you do matter. And I think that thread is really important for people to have when they're sewing a tattoo for themselves, sewing something into their story. It's not to say that if people get tattooed in a way where it's like the opposite narrative, they've got no meaning or I'm meaningless, doesn't mean they're not going to be able to get benefit from that. Hopefully they get to a point where they can reflect. That's part of the work we're doing at the Pathway here. It's like when people start to open their eyes to what's happening. Maybe they've just become parents, right? And they look at all the tattoos they go when they were younger, and they're like, oh, geez, what does this say about me? How am I going to talk to my children about this Mario, We're trying to like give them tools to help reframe those things and how to approach it in a better way. So, I mean, like, have you had the conversation with your kids yet? Have they asked about yours, or how do you frame up
so my
tattoos and the value of them to your kids in a way that, gives them the guidance they need?
So my daughter, she has asked me about my tattoos, and my oldest, she has, and she'll rub my arm, and because it's kind of like to her, it's like, it's like a 3D picture, like, oh my gosh, am I gonna feel the flowers or something on your arm, right? And she's like, oh Dad, what did you get here? What did you do to your arm? And it's one of those things where it's like, yes, what do you got? And these are Dad's tattoos, and this is what I got because Dad loves roses and flowers, and then I show her the Bible verses, and then I show her what it says, and it says Jesus saves right here, and it really actually opens up a conversation to be a teachable moment about our faith and what we believe in, and so it's wonderful. However, this is like the double-edged sword, though, right? Where it's like, how do I address tattoos when they're older, right? Because again, they're going to see it on Dad. Like, my wife doesn't have tattoos. She talks about it, but truthfully, she doesn't like pain, and so I don't think she'll ever end up getting tattoos. But I think from them, when they get older and they're like, well, my dad has tattoos, like, so it's like I can get a tattoo, and it's like, well, hold on, maybe I'm not opposed to you getting a tattoo, but I mean, location of the tattoo is essential, especially for your first one. And then, what are you going to get the tattoo of? Like, and so like the conversation and how my parents broached it, and it's kind of like we were talking about earlier, where, taking their ideas and making it your own, as if, as if you were the one who came up with it. I'm going to take it on and like, it was my idea to sit you down and really just discuss this idea of this concept of what you wanted for your tattoo, when you really was your grandparents who did the same thing for me, right? And they did it for me. Again, I'll say this, because they did it for me because my older brother, well, not my older brother, my twin brother, he had gotten a tattoo and hid it from them. And then they were like, we knew you had a tattoo. You were really bad at trying to hide things for us, especially when it was on your chest and you're like, you act like we can't see the saran wrap on your chest, and we haven't been walking this earth longer than you, right? So like, like it was one of those things where it was like, oh, okay, so you knew, and so then it would turn into like, okay, got it. Well, Quan, you good? You want to go get a tattoo? Well, let's talk about it, right? And so like, I'm gonna do. My intent, it would be to do the same thing for my daughters. It's like, hey, like at 18, if you want to go get a tattoo, sure, but let's talk about it, right? Like, let's talk about and then let's also look into, maybe waiting and saying like, hey, when you come to a decision in which you're like, no, this is what I would like, because fortunate for me, I don't regret any of my tattoos. So like,
yeah.
But I know several other individuals who do regret some of their tattoos, and whether they cover them up, or they try to get them removed, or they just kind of like, it's just there and I just forget about it until someone asks me about it. But like, I don't want them to regret or have a regret of like, I got this tattoo because I was trying to appeal to someone or appease people, or trying to get, not appease, but like trying to get people to like me and be like, oh, you're cool, right? Like, no, like have meaning behind it. Like if it has meaning, and I think this is really what the powerful thing is. If it has meaning, that they can't take it away from you. You know what I mean? Like people can say, like, I could sit here and say all day, like, oh, that's a stupid Mario tattoo that you have on your thigh. But you could say, I played Mario growing up on Nintendo 64 with my brother every single day. And then when we were 15, he passed away. And this is what helps me remember my brother, because we would play Mario. And it was one of the fondest memories I have of him, right? Super morbid, I know. It's the only example. But again, it has meaning to that individual, and it has value to that person. So me sitting here saying like, oh, why would you get a Mario tattooed on you? They're like, oh, I have Mario. My brother had Luigi. And it's meaningful to them, right? There's meaning behind it. And that, I think, you don't need to tell everybody. Obviously, you don't need to be able to walk around and be like, hey, this has meaning, so don't ask about it, right? No, it's being able to say, like, you could tell when the person, when you ask somebody, you're like, oh, hey, what does that tattoo mean? And you're like, man, me and my brother, man, he has Luigi on I have Mario on my right thigh, he has Luigi on his left thigh, and when we were growing up, we used to play Nintendo, like something like that, fond memory. You could tell it's building. There's an emotional response that is generated from there. And I think that is the true meaning, powerful behind tattoos. And if my girls and my son want to get tattoos, I want them to have meaning to them. And me being their dad, yes, you're going to have to explain it to me. And I want to make, have genuine meaning, not just like, me and my friends really like playing Mario Kart, like, no, like I want you want it to have genuine meaning. And so I don't know, that's how I would go about it. But, it's funny because I was going to ask you the same question, like, you being a tattoo artist, and having kids, like there's this, some would believe like, oh, as soon as your kids become of age and they ask for a tattoo, you're going to do it. Right. And it's like, is that kind of the mindset? Like, are you of like, hey, I don't mind, tattoos, or is it kind of like, I do it for a living, but we're not going to do it here,
Yeah. I mean, I have conversations with mainly my daughter, the 7-year-old. I'm sure there'll be more. I have conversations with her all the time. She spends a lot of time in this space with me, getting her head around what I'm doing. So she's got like a pretty inside view of the process for a lot of people, and already understands it better than a lot of people do that come in to get tattooed, right? So it's more this ongoing thing with my kids. There's no desire from me to tattoo them or for them to get tattooed. It's like completely their own walk, so to speak. Who knows, they might act on that rebellious thing at some stage. I don't know how things will play out, but I'm definitely giving him sort of the grounding, I guess. And I mean, to just like book note and take a short of what I sort of got from what you were saying is, it needs to come from the heart, right? It needs to be something that there's an emotional charge, like you were saying. It needs to be grounded in something that's real and meaningful to you, and no one can take it. I think my kids get that. But they're also seeing these other patterns where it's like there's usually a layer of change or transition or transformation that's taking place for the person that coincides with the tattoo. That's usually like a big part of it, especially for people I'm tattooing. It's like, which isn't the like, you know, the tattoo shop thing where it's more of a commercial aspect. But like a lot of the time people coming in, it's like, yeah, it might be like the loss of someone or a change of role in terms of age or relationship or workplace, and there's usually some other change taking place that the tattoo is correlated to. Even if the person doesn't see it, you start talking to them about what's happening in their life, and they feel like getting tattoos done, and there's usually something that's shifting, you know, doors are sliding and changing in the background anyway. So they're great for that. So, I mean, hopefully my kids pick these cues up, that there should be an important point in time as well as an important meaning or intention behind the tattoo. So there's not one layer. It's not like, oh, the tattoo is just meaningful because of what it is. You know, it's also why you get it and when you get it. You know, which can help with the timing thing. Yeah. You said about like maybe waiting. I think that's a big one. Like for people listening, whether it's parents or kids or whatever, it's like waiting. I think it's like there's nearly like a over 50% regret rate for tattoos between 18 and 25. You know, I think around the 30, when you turn 30 is a good time to sort of lean into it. You know who you are a lot more. And if it's something before that, like you said, sort of size and placement, have it pretty well considered that it's something that, you know, it's highly likely you'll feel different about it, you know, so somewhere that you can live with that and allow the change in perspective, you know.
That's so awesome, Mark. You know, I've truly enjoyed this conversation because, you know, it's one of those things where when you sit in a barber chair, right? And I'll give this example, and I promise, we'll conclude, guys. But when you sit in a barber chair and the barber's cutting your hair, and you're having the conversation going back and forth, you don't really realize the wisdom that barber actually has, because your perception is that they only cut hair. So what do they really know outside of cutting hair? Again, not talking down on barbers, but just kind of like, you know, there's that factor of like, hey, like you deal, you know, you just cut hair. But then the reality is they're dealing with all different sorts of people every single day with different head shapes, different hair types, different beliefs, different everything, right? And they have this wisdom about them because they have to be able to speak to all these individuals, and they have to be able to understand who these individuals are at the end of the day, right? Because they want to leave here looking, feeling, and being someone different than who they were when they walked in before their haircut. And so when it comes to a tattoo artist, right, such as yourself, when you're sitting and you have, it's for some tattoos, if they're 5+ hours or 3+ hours to 5 hours or whatever the case might be, you're really going to get to know the individual, who you're tattooing, but two, who is doing the tattooing, in the sense of, because you're like, hey, this person has a needle with a motor on it, and they're just freaking dipping it in some color, and they're going ham on my arm, my back, my leg, wherever it is, right? And you're just like, and I'm trusting this person to not mess up or whatever, just to know what they're doing, to focus. But like, again, there's this wisdom that you have, because again, you have to deal with all different types of people. But then when it comes to people getting tattoos, and I know you can attest to this, they're at different stages in their life, whether they're just experienced grief, or they just experienced loss, or they've experienced just one of the greatest days of their life, and they're wanting to use the tattoo as a way to say, hey, look, this thing happened to me, and I want to remember it and not forget it, right? But again, young people, they do it more out of rebellion, and do they do it out of more as a fad, rather than understanding, like, man, I was in this space of my life, and I thought, like, you know, this was what was important to me, but now it's changed. But still, I'm glad I had this reminder, because this reminder reminds me my kids are my life. My kids are the thing that makes me go, that gets me up in the morning, It gives me my purpose. It gives me my why and drives me to say, hey, I have to work hard at work. I can't afford to make more mistakes at work. I can't afford to upset my boss or cuss out that coworker that just really grinds my gears. Like I have to really work hard and commit to just toughen it out, because they are the reason for my future, or for why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I hope all of that made sense. That being said, before we go, Mark, where can people find you? What's the best place for people to get more information? And if for those who are in Australia, where can they, if they want to get a tattoo, how do they make that happen?
Okay, yeah, cool. Well, me personally, it's themarkofnara.com, and it's the same Instagram handle, the Mark of Nara. In terms of the educational resources that we have, in terms of understanding your tattoos better, what might be actually contained in there and how that might be influencing you, or how to approach a tattoo. A lot of people, they lack guidance in that department. How do I go about it?
Okay.
That's tattoopathway.com. And at Tattoo Pathway, we have like a community, basically. So, people that are approaching tattoos are sort of coming together and going through some different tools we have that help them sort of understand what they're actually getting into and how to mitigate that. One of those things is like how to, contact and sort of mediate with an artist in a way so that you end up getting the result that you're after, and you're doing it in a respectful way and stuff. Yeah. So all those resources are there at Tattoo Pathway. Because it's online, it's, if you're in the States and the things that we've been talking about are of interest, it's pretty easy to get involved. Obviously I can't tattoo people in the States, but there are people that are part of that community in the States. So it gives you access to a different network. I like to explain it as there's the mainstream, which is kind of the contemporary tattoo culture and the tattoo industry. Yes. And then what we do at Tattoo Pathway is like a breakaway stream or a little side stream where things are like quite intentional and meaningful. And we make sure that they correlate to the bigger picture of someone's life and who they are. The tattoo isn't just this isolated thing that's orbiting. So if you want tattoos that are really meaningful, you need to be approaching your life in a pretty meaningful way. And so again, we have sort of tools and different methods for people to make sure that's happening. And I appreciate everyone's time that's listened, and your time, Q. Been nice chatting.
Absolutely. It's been a phenomenal time. Again, Mark, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And guys, hey, as usual, before we go, please check out mediocredads.net to get the merchandise, ODA, Obedience Demands Action. I put out a little thing today, and I might have been a little overzealous. I'm not going to lie. I might have been a little overzealous. But at this point, I've already said it, and it was live. It was on a live, so I can't go back now. We're just going to see where it goes. March 20th is the three-year anniversary of the creation of Mediocre Dads. And, I do believe in God that He is directing me and leading me to bigger and larger heights. And so I said 10,000 subscribers. And if we can make it happen, I don't know if it's going to happen, but with you all, I think if we share this and really get it out there, I think we can get close to 10,000. Now, I'm almost at 3, so that's 7,000 more people to go. It's a lot of people. Again, a little overzealous. I was a little excited, but I already said it. So I'm at this point, I'm committing myself to saying, you know what? Let's see where it goes. Let's see what happens. Let's see what God does, and really just bless me, bless all of you, and with more of me wherever you're getting Mediocre Dads at. So, but anyway, guys, that's all I got. Remember, being mediocre is a choice, and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. That's all I got. Until next time, guys, we're out.